Well, it's great to have you here for this webcast. My name is Jonathan Foust, and you're here. Before we launch, we're going to launch into part two of how to access the flow state. A short, brief thank yous, short meditation, and then I'll intro the talk. First of all, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison, for streaming this out to you right now. Big thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. All that information for Rita's mindful movement class that precedes this is on my Facebook page and on my website. I got a newsletter. You might find it supportive, helpful, amusing. And I also have to say that this is offered in the spirit of generosity, of the intention that no one's denied access. So there's no charge, no ads, nothing like that. So that's all offered freely, and any support you have to help support this is also welcomed freely. All righty, let's just get right into it. How do we access the flow state? I love this whole idea. There's a quote from a basketball player who famously said, "The trick is to let the game come to you." That's the flow state, letting the moment come to you, not reaching, not grasping. And it's a delicate thing. So let's explore some of the ways that you can kind of open into what we might call flow. Relaxation is key. Concentration is key, but not too concentrated. So let's see if we can find that balance in the next, say, 12 minutes. If you like, you can close your eyes, and it might be helpful. Reach your arms up overhead, kind of stretch out to the left side, the right side. Open your jaw wide if you like. A nice little flow experience, which I do for myself. I lead quite often. If you like, bring your hands about equal to your shoulders with your palms facing inward. And then, if you like, again, you can close your eyes with a soft gaze and let your awareness flood into the palms. Feel from the inside the fingers. Feel or imagine the space between the fingers. Can you feel the space between your thumbs and forefingers? And now, from the inside, relax your thumbs. Relax the fingers. This is very subtle, but if you bring your attention into the fingertips and you relax and pause and just sort of wait, can you feel any emerging sense of tingling or pulse or vibration or subtle energy? Now, here comes the flow part. If you were to imagine someone watching you and they could barely perceive movement of your hands as they transition through space, let your hands begin an ultra slow motion descent down toward your lap. If someone was watching, they could barely perceive movement and just feel the smallest unit of movement that's available for you. The ultra slow micro movements of the hands through space. Your mind wanders. Again, bring your attention back. What is the smallest unit of movement you can perceive? If your hands have come to rest, let your attention just remain in this felt sense of the hands And if you're still in transit, just stay with what you're aware of. And now, if you would, sense if you could relax the muscles of your face. Feel your face like the face of a marble statue. Relax your tongue, the lips. Feel the weight and the volume of your shoulders and down through your arms, down through the elbows, all the way down through the wrists, and again back into the palms and fingers and thumbs, the backs of the hands. Any sense of aliveness, pulse, tingling, vibration. Could you soften the belly? Sense down through the legs, the soles of the feet. And now relax even more. Is it possible right now to sense who you are as the observer or the witness of everything that's changing? Can you sense the flow of your experience, the phenomena of changing sensations, the flow of the narrative or commentary or thoughts, the flow even of changing states? Letting the moment come to you as the observer, the witness. What is it like inside when you let the flow, the ever changing experience, come to you to happen all by itself? You might sense again, is there anything inside right now that could relax? Can you again sense who you are as the observer? Can you let things be? Let them change all by themselves. And you might very gently now just sense the space around you, sense the breath inside, and sense the quality of presence right now. If you could find two words that describe this moment, what might they be? What has shifted over this period of focusing inward? As you're ready, you might begin to deepen the breath, let your body move and stretch in any way that feels good for you. And welcome back. This elusive sense of flow, we've all experienced it. Those moments when life is just arising, you're letting it be, you're absorbed, you're relaxed. This alchemy of wonderful stuff. And it's been said you can't make intuition happen, but you can cultivate the optimal space for it to arrive. And it's the same thing with the flow state. So, this talk is going to dive a little bit deeper into the mechanics of the flow state. What are the triggers that block you? What are the triggers that help you gain access to what it's like to open into flow? I hope you enjoy the following. Blessings in all things. I'm currently by the beach with Tara's family, and we have a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old under this roof. I think the last time I was with a 3-year-old was when I was 3 years old. And it's been fascinating because it's so new to me to just watch kids play. It's fascinating. There's such a sense of playing with this sense of yes, like whatever happens, just a yes. It's all the rules of improv are happening right there. And as I've been reflecting on flow, how to access the flow state, here it is in action when you watch a 3-year-old playing. There's this sense of uninterrupted concentration and deep embodiment. They're learning through doing. I've also noticed that there's a difference between being with a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, playing with them, and trying to write a talk with a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. Completely fractured attention, unable to focus. I've been more and more off track, trying to write this talk. It's been really, really interesting as I've been thinking about accessing the flow state, noticing more and more what gets in the way of the flow state. But I'm very excited about this topic because this is something that you can learn and that you can learn how to access. And I've had some great insights as I've been reflecting on it these last 2 weeks. What I'd like to share with you in this next little bit of time is to explore really 4 questions. The first is, what's the relationship between mindfulness and this esoteric flow state? How can you reliably access the flow state? And how does the flow state, which we usually think of as very action-oriented, how does it set the stage for meditation and the mystery of life? And then fourth, are there any concerns or contraindications to the flow state? So what I'm so interested in is this shift of moving into flow. And I just want to say that there's so much here. There's lots of great study and incredible presenters out there. Csikszentmihalyi is one of the kind of the father of flow. Also, anything by Stephen Kotler. He's given some great presentations online. I'll share some resources at the end and in the notes as well. So mindfulness and the flow state, how does that work? One of the things I'd like to talk about is some of the triggers that sort of trigger us into the flow state. And I've been playing with it over the last couple of weeks as I've been thinking about it and bringing it into my meditation and thinking about sharing this with you. And one of the little triggers I've done is draw us on one element. When you're in flow, there's this sense of time dilation. And it can either be that everything slows down or everything speeds up. If you've ever been involved in a task and you look up and like 4 hours went by and you were just so absorbed, that's that idea of time dilation. Or sometimes it's just like time actually either slows down or speeds up. When quarterbacks in the football league, National Football League, move from college to professional, the game is so much faster. And so many quarterbacks, they can't cut it because it's so fast. But they all talk about this kind of mystical state when suddenly they're in this fast moving game and everything slows down, and then they can see the field and see the spaces and start to see the percentages and probabilities as they're playing. So this sense of time dilation has been a really interesting thing for me to trigger. What I've been doing, and again, this is not all the time, but sometimes it's like I'll just suddenly just shift into slow motion mode. When I'm reaching for the door handle, total focus on my hand, turning the doorknob and then opening the door and then feeling the temperature differential between inside and outside. Or from time to time, I'll just tell myself, for the next 3 breaths, how intimately can I feel the breath? Or if I'm like opening a car door, anything like that, just like a 30-second slow everything down. And what's interesting is how this state of flow, the sense of a deep absorption, we can't make it happen, but we can cultivate the optimal setting. So a quick Zen check-in. If you like, you can close your eyes. And let me ask you right now, how intimately can you feel the next 3 breaths on the inside? Is it possible to relax your shoulders in a way they just incrementally fall away from your ears? And can you feel from the inside right now the soles of your feet and your heels? And is there any sense now of just being a little more here, of arriving in the here and now? If you like, you can open your eyes, and if you like, you can leave them open. These little moments of slowing down are just one of the triggers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But there's certain characteristics of the flow state that would be helpful to kind of name, and then we'll explore some of the strategies for kind of entry into it. One of the things that's really helpful is to have a sense of clear goals and clear feedback. So your scattered attention is really focused. You got a specific goal and specific feedback that's going to let you know if you're on track for that goal. So you might imagine how the flow state is quite commonly associated with sports, like any sport or extreme sports. So think of tennis. Your goal is to win, and the feedback is, did you hit the ball back? So it's kind of immediate. The second thing is a high level of concentration on a limited field. Again, you're taking this attention, which can be very, very scattered and has the capacity to go out beyond the furthest stars, and you're bringing it right to a focal point. High level of concentration. So in tennis, you're focusing on the ball. If you're a batter, you're focusing on the seams of the ball as it's coming closer to you. So that getting access to concentration is a prerequisite. And this is a really interesting one here, is getting the balance between your skills and the challenges. And this is critical. You want to be challenged, so you're engaged, but not too challenged, so you get frustrated and get into judging mind and shut down. It's like if you want to get better at tennis, since we're kind of on the tennis metaphor, it's always better to find someone who's a little bit better than you, because that's going to engage you. And you want it about like 10 to 30% better than you. If they're a pro, forget it. So when I was focused on mastering my French, the French language, I would always look for someone whose English was worse than my French. So it would give me that opportunity to kind of play that edge where I'm on a learning curve, but the right learning curve, and dialing that in is important. And it's an interesting element here as well, as you want a feeling of control, but you also want a feeling of security and relaxation without worry. And again, so you can sense this middle way, kind of fine tuning that you want to have a sense of, like you have a sense of control, but you also have a sense of relaxation. There's that Zen phrase, if you like control without controlling, if you have a sense of that. And again, because we're exploring paradoxes in the flow state, you're intensely concentrated, intensely focused, but you're also exploring a sense of effortlessness, a sense of ease. Again, when you look at professional tennis players, oftentimes they'll say how when they watch themselves playing tennis, they'll say, wow, it looked like I was trying really hard, but on the inside, I was just guided. There was an inner logic that was sort of telling me where to go. And again, this altered perception of time either condensing or expanding. So what it kind of leads to is this melding of action and consciousness. So something's happening, you're right there with it, and there's no room for worry or fear or distraction. That's taking us into that flow state. And there's sort of like this, what's referred to sometimes as the return on investment. That the goal of winning that tennis match is satisfying, but the activity is fulfilling. As one tennis player said, I play to win, but mostly I play to play. So you've abandoned the result, like the goal, on the one hand, but on the other hand, you're kind of holding it lightly. So you get that sense of the paradoxes here. So how do you do it? How do you get into the flow state? And there are a couple things that I like to kind of go through here that I've found very, very helpful. When we think of flow, we kind of think of like this effortless, everything's just happening. But paradoxically, it's like the most creative people are quite often the most dialed in. They're the most disciplined. And in that same way, there's something here as well of getting into the flow state kind of requires training yourself to narrow your attention. So the first thing you want to do is eliminate external distractions. Try to take away what's going to call your attention out of the here and now. So having a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old in the room when I'm trying to write a talk isn't going to work. So oftentimes I use headphones, noise-canceling headphones when I work. I try to have my desk clear and not have my browser open or have my alerts open. The whole idea is one thing at a time. So whenever you want to think about getting into the flow state, take a look at what's going to pull you away externally. But you also need to take a look at what's going to pull your attention away internally. So you want to remove the internal distractions. And that's, of course, a very subjective thing. And this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where mindfulness becomes a very, very powerful tool in cultivating the flow state. And this is the power of meditation, of strengthening the witness. When you can name a worry or a fear, it tends to lose its grip a little bit. So for me, my meditation is absolutely critical for sort of naming what's between me and feeling free, getting a little bit of distance from it. I also find journaling really, really helpful. when I journal every day after my meditation, and it helps me to sort of set aside my concern for the stressors in my life. Not all the time and not always successfully. The other technique I do is with my wife, with Tara, where we consciously a few times a week we kind of clear whatever may be between us. So the sense of eliminating internal distractions is really, really helpful. And mindfulness does two things. It heightens your awareness of the internal distractions, but it also heightens your capacity to explore your relationship to it, to create a little more room for it. The next kind of trigger that kind of helps you to access the flow state is to really do an assessment where you can work at your biological peak time. This has been a game changer for me. If you ever had that experience where a task that would normally take you 3 hours, somehow magically you do it in 1 hour, chances are you kind of line things up with your biological peak time in order to do that. So for me, it's the morning. And the morning is when my energy is flowing, my creativity is flowing, and I may be a little manic here, but I have pretty much designed my lifestyle around my peak biological time. I go to bed around 8:30 so that I can be up around 4:30 or 5. And then that gives me these precious hours when I can really enjoy clarity of mind and give all of my attention to what's most important to me. For others, it's night. For others, it moves through the day, but really looking for when is the time of your day when you're most likely going to go into that zone space. Other triggers that some people find really helpful is the right kind of music. There have been all these studies on sound and consciousness and dual binaural beats and all these different effects of what sound can do. Different kinds of music invoke different brainwave states. And you want to have music that's not too distracting, that's going to pull you into memories or into the song itself. I use 2 apps that have really helped me. One is called Focus, and these are actually kind of scientifically designed audio tracks that really support brainwave function for focus. Another app is called Brainwave. It's on iOS, and you can sort of dial in soundtracks that are going to help you to either relax or focus or meditate. But the focus things really help me. And I've shared this before, but I always set my timer for the sounds for 25 minutes. So I do 25 minutes with a soundtrack to kind of help me remove those external and internal distractions, kind of focus, kind of set the stage for more and more absorption. Then I take a forced break, and that helps me a lot. Now, the fifth trigger here, and again, when we look at awareness has the capacity to move out to the edge of the universe. Awareness has the capacity to scan for what could kill you. Awareness has the capacity for laser focus. And if you want to cultivate a flow state where you're absorbed, it's helpful to have a very, very specific task. Again, this is why, it's where this all sort of came out of was people doing extreme sports, because I know for myself, for a number of years I did rock climbing. When you're hanging on by your fingernails onto a rock wall, there's nothing else in your mind other than trying to stay on that wall. But what we've found is, and I'll talk more about this later, that flow state, you can apply it in so many other ways. But specific task is really helpful. For me, I do my little ritual where in the morning I write down 3 things I'm going to accomplish this day. And if I get these 3 things done, it's going to be a good day. Now, I actually have about 30 things that I'd like to do. But if I can name those 3 and then name the hardest one and then do that one first and make a very, very clear goal, when I can do that successfully, It's going to bring my attention into that sense of laser focus. Either so I'm going to complete 1,000 words, I'm going to complete writing this Dharma talk. And again, I've noticed if I can do that specific task trigger, I can get these little mini flow experiences. I'm here by the ocean, so I'm washing my wetsuit. I'm going to be really aware of washing my wetsuit. I'm going to rinse out this cup and be really, really aware of it. For the next 3 breaths, I'm going to feel the next 3 breaths. These can be a very powerful trigger for moving inward. Another trigger as you're cultivating the flow state is you want to find a task that is challenging, but not too challenging. Again, we're back to this middle way thing, not too tight, not too loose. And this is fascinating. For you to access the flow state, your brain needs to be fully engaged. But if it's too challenging, you're going to get frustrated. The comparing mind is going to come in, the critic is going to come in, and it will completely sabotage the flow state. So you need to find a way to make it interesting and find a way to kind of challenge yourself. It's this balance of being focused and happy. And it's interesting to watch, as I've been just watching young children this week, how when they're doing problem solving with toys, when they just have that sense of trying to, they have the sense of how a toy works, and they go into this deep absorption of problem solving and then accomplishment. The happiness and joy is really quite palpable. But if it's beyond their skill level, then they get frustrated. And we have that same sense of dialing in, give me a challenge, but it can't be too challenging. So again, having a clear outcome, really, really helpful. I'm going to feel at the end of this tennis match, I did the best job I could, for example. If you don't know what the goal is, then your brain's going to struggle to get optimum concentration. How do I want to feel at the end of this is something that I find very helpful to kind of get that sense of the outcome. If it isn't like, okay, I want to get this specific goal, it's simply like, okay, after the end of this, I want to feel like I really gave it my all. When we explore procrastination loves it when you don't have clarity. Because when there's not clarity, then the mind's sort of free to do what it does. So, clear goal. Now this one's kind of optional, but it's named as a trigger in a number of places, and it's a trigger for me, and that's the strategic use of caffeine. Some say 200 milligrams of caffeine can help you to put you into that state of relaxed and happy and focused. But more than that is sort of diminished. Another trigger is hydration. Your brain is 75% water. And you may have noticed there are times when you may feel sluggish or unfocused or have low energy. And if you hydrate, your mind will clear up. Be aware of that. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. There have been some studies that have said that when you're hydrated, when you're really well hydrated, you're about 14% more quicker in your thinking process. Now, in the final one, and let me just review these because this is a lot. But again, eliminate external distractions, eliminate the internal distractions, find your biological peak time, which is going to improve your success at flow. Consider having kind of like background or music or something like that. That can be super helpful. Work on a specific task, really, really specific. Make it challenging, but not too challenging. Have a clear outcome that you want. And then consider caffeine and hydration. And then this final one is really interesting, and I've been playing with this. And that is to create a mental cue that's going to help you to get started. There's someone I know, he's a computer guy. And so he sits down to write code. he has this little ritual he does. Like he gets everything set, and he claps his hands, he rubs them together, and then he gets going. If you I'm always making references to, I really don't follow football that carefully. I do follow my lifelong hero, Tom Brady, where he just yells, "Let's go," and then there's his trigger. 3 breaths. Anything you do that creates kind of a neuro association with moving into that flow state is helpful. I've actually experimented by, like, when I sit down, I clap my hands, I rub them together, take 3 breaths, and then trying to build that association of going into flow state. Now, the interesting thing is when it comes to productivity, you are 5 times more productive when you're in the flow state. That's kind of makes sense to me. It certainly is true for me. When I kind of contrast trying to focus with the kids in the background and having my headphones on and being very, very clear what I want, setting a time limit, remove the distractions, get in there, I get so much more done. You get a lot more done. It's a very, very practical thing. There have been some studies that most people, and again, this is a study that was done in conjunction with Google and Stephen Kotler, where he said that most people have about 5% are in flow state at different times. He said when you're at 15%, your productivity doubles. And the really cool thing is you can learn this. They did a 6-week training with Google, and people noticed a 35 to 80% increase in access to flow. So this flow state is really, it's a pretty optimal place to be. But as they say, but wait, there's more. When you apply the flow state to your meditation practice, it gets really, really cool. Really, really interesting, because the thing about the flow state is when you're in like pure flow, and you can be in little mini flows, you can be on a spectrum of flow, but when you're really in that deep flow state, you are utterly absorbed. And it kind of brings in this sense of no I and no mine, or the sense of I and mine gets more porous, and the moment starts just sort of unfolding by itself. This relaxed, receptive inner state is just the coolest. For me, the times when I've experienced like the deepest sense of the flow state in meditation is when I had sustained time without distractions. So in the month-long retreats that I have done, many weeks of focus, of concentration, of bringing myself back, and just naming all the stuff that just comes up, establishing that sense of the witness, being the observer of what's changing, and then this beautiful thing starts to arise, or it did for me. It's certainly no guarantee. Sometimes a retreat is nothing but bringing yourself back again and again and again. Sometimes a retreat reveals how utterly depleted you are, and it becomes a kindness retreat of just filling your cup again. Sometimes you become aware of trauma or hypervigilance, and you kind of work that. But sometimes there can be this sort of natural kind of upwelling. And kind of in this flow state, I've talked about this in the last couple of weeks, of how when you get very, very concentrated, and then you begin to feel this upwelling of pleasure, you can bring your attention to that sense of pleasure and let that be your anchor. And so having those moments of just riding these super pleasurable waves of deep, deep pleasure. And what I've noticed is that in this sort of like deepening state of here and now, I notice when I'm in that sense of flow, the moment's happening by itself, it's incredible. And then I also notice how my mind slides off, like, oh, isn't this cool? I'm doing something special. And then that sense of like relaxing, receiving, bringing in some concentration, letting go of the outcome, and then again softening into the moment. These profound states are possible in meditation, of being so deeply relaxed and so deeply aware I've noticed for myself, there are times when I'm in that very, very deep state that I just notice, like, wherever I focus my attention inside, I can feel the energy respond almost immediately. I can bring my attention to my hand, and moments later, my hand becomes really warm and sending the energy around. And then just noticing that I can even let go of that, and dropping a sense of even being a meditator, of anyone making anything happen, and this sense of incredible, almost indescribable pleasure that can occur. And I remember once in one of these like deeper states of meditation, this flow state, this thought popped up that said, I would give my right arm to come back here again. And I just noticed, wow, right there to wanting mind, right there to desire, and more on that shortly, because that's one of the challenges when you explore these very, very powerful internal states. So I'm taking a look at the time here, and I get so excited about this stuff. I can tend to go on and on. Let me tell you a little bit about the flow state. One thing that Stephen Kotler talks about is that our old ideas of high performance are wrong. The whole idea of like you only use 10% of your brain, and we have so much more brain available. What he says is that actually, when you're in the flow state, you use less of your brain. The logic and decision making tends to kind of shut down. The prefrontal cortex sort of shuts down and trades the energy. And this is the part of the brain that calculates time. So past and future can fall away, that there's very little room for anxiety, because anxiety is past and future. So when you're in this sense of deep now, when your anxiety drops away, there's almost like a resetting of the nervous system. And this sense of the prefrontal cortex, which tends to shut down in the flow state, is related to the sense of self. And the sense of self includes self-criticism and selfishness. All that starts to fall away, and you can kind of sense like who you are out of the box. And so when it comes to the flow state, what's very interesting is, again, when they first started studying flow, they were really interested in these extreme sports folks. And then they noticed, wow, a lot of like professional athletes, they kind of learn how to go into that state where they're utterly absorbed and abandoning the outcome, and just in that effortless sense of responding to the moment. But here's the interesting thing, is that what they found is that many, many people who experience the flow state, their avenue is not so much through sports, but it has to do with knowledge workers, which is a lot of us these days. Creativity, and again, I'm quoting Stephen Kotler here. It's a beautiful talk that you might want to check out. He says how creativity is the most important 21st century skill. The creative mind can take new information, connect it with new ideas. When you're in the flow state, you can do that because your sense of self and self-criticism diminishes. So you can give more energy to the information, and you can connect old ideas to new ideas. You can sense pattern recognition better. Also, with that sense of the diminished sense of a separate self, risk-taking goes up. And so it can allow you to take more risks creatively, which is just fascinating stuff. All these neurochemicals get released in the flow state. And you may be familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. You need 10,000 hours to focus on developing a new skill. And what Kotler said is that as you cultivate the flow state more and more and more, you can cut that in half. So here's the interesting thing. We tend to think of the flow state as helping us be more productive. But then paradoxically, we have this sense of, well, the quickest way to be happy is to choose what you already have. And Werner Erhard. The quickest way to be happy is to choose what you already have. So when we think of meditation taking us into like the mystical experience, into awakening, we're in this beautiful state of surrender. We have to let go of the outcome. We have to abandon any sense of I and mine. And as T.S. Eliot said, that cost of entry is costing not less than everything. So what does that mean? Well, it means really releasing the attachment to the outcome, releasing the sense of self. When people describe the mystical experience, or just the mystery itself, it's generally with a sense of wonder. Oftentimes they'll say, I wasn't trying to make anything happen. The moment was just flowing by itself. I could feel the space in my body, but the space beyond the furthest stars, and awareness wasn't limited to my body anymore. Awareness just is. Those are just super, super compelling states. When we experience those profound states of presence, the mind wants more. The mind simply wants more and more in ever-increasing quantities forever and ever. And so, paradoxically, again, the most creative people quite often are the most disciplined. And in that same way, many of those who have experienced the mystical qualities of life, the mystery of life itself, have put in their time. They have lived disciplined lives. So when you think about your meditation practice, maybe you've had the thought, why bother? My mind is just a caffeinated chipmunk. I have no control over it. I said it was time to meditate, but nothing in me wants to meditate right now. What I've noticed is, when I can embrace the discipline of practice, there are so many times in my meditation practice when the last thing I want to do is meditate. And I meditate, and something unexpected arises. I've noticed that the luckiest people in life are usually the ones that work the hardest. I've noticed the more creative I am in life is when I'm the most structured. And so developing that sense of resilience and discipline is an integral part of cultivating openness and ease in the flow state. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi said, flow is a state of optimal experience, a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. And this leads to kind of the concern, or I wouldn't call it a contraindication, but it points out something to be aware of when you experience these intensely pleasurable experiences in life and in meditation. There's a guy named James Taylor, who's a big wave surfer. He said, everything I do in my life is to try to get into that place of surfing big waves. And when I'm there, then everything makes sense. When I'm not there, and I hear that there are big waves and I miss them, I feel depressed and I feel upset. There's a study done on surfers who are real, I think it's safe to say, flow addicts. And many of them say it's like a drug. You have to increase the dosage to maintain the high. And so what some of these surfers report is how they surf when they're seriously injured because they don't want to miss it. They look for bigger and bigger waves. Some have reported that they're chasing this flow state to avoid the depression and the anger that they felt from early family issues. Many reported that they couldn't function in society. That was all about the next big wave. So I think it's important to kind of find that balance of just noticing the nature of the mind is to want. And there's something so exquisitely paradoxical about these intensely pleasurable practices that occur in meditation and occur in life, and as to be aware of desire, to be aware of wanting. It's such a dicey thing to be aware of. But what you might consider is to explore how you might bring this a little bit more into your life. Kind of reflect on how some of these little triggers might be helpful for you in your practice. And to recognize that the paradox of the flow state requires that we bring ourselves fully to our practice, which is why in so many traditions they emphasize focusing on the mechanics. I've shared before how much of my life and much of my background is in yoga, which uses a lot of dramatic practices to get energy flowing. How that kind of set me up for chasing lights and rainbows in my practice. And in many ways, that was a very, very powerful lesson for me, because I was looking for something that I thought was permanent. But it's the full package, I find, that's so, so important. Cultivating resilience, cultivating focus, really knowing what you want, and then giving all of your attention toward that can be so helpful. And recognizing when it comes to your meditation practice, that there are times when concentration will serve you greatly. You won't want to do it. But when you cultivate that sense of discipline and focus and resilience, you start to build a power. There is power in focus. There's power in attention. And then there are times for mindfulness, to take that seat of the observer where you can observe without preference, where you can observe without judgment. And what you begin to notice is how you're relating to your life, noticing all of your patterns of resistance and avoidance and wanting. And you can begin to realize that you have choice in your life. That more and more as you develop that sense of the witness, that you can be less and less reactive to life. And this miracle of being more and more responsive to life, to choose how you want to relate. Some people argue there is no choice, but there is something here about the power of being more aware, being more awake. And then there's something here as well about exploring what it's like to abandon yourself to your experience, to kind of set the stage for total absorption. And to really reflect on what are the qualities, what are the triggers that work for you to bring yourself into this state that can be truly and deeply optimal for accomplishing the things that are most important in your life. When you can begin to sidestep the critic, when you can sort of allow yourself to move into optimal learning, optimal creativity through applying some of these technologies. And then how can you apply it when it comes to waking up in your life? That, to me, is so exciting, because it truly points toward what it means to be fully awake in your life, to be more and more aware of who and what you truly are. So why don't we close with just I think with just a few minutes left, we'll close with a short meditation. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just sense the flow of your breathing right now. Just notice where you feel the breath inside. And allow yourself just to sense the intimacy of the breath on the inside. Sense who you are as the observer. And you might just take a few moments to allow yourself to notice what's changing. Notice what's shifting and moving. And you might imagine for a moment, in the absence of I or mine, in the absence of any effort, if you open into allowing, what do you notice? What do you feel? You might just take a few moments now just to deepen your breath. You might gently let your eyes open. I'll include some notes if you'd like to explore more with those who know this state intimately and know a lot of the technology that can support you around flow. This calling to optimal performance can be a bit of a self-improvement project. And there can be a lot of desire and clinging to that. But ultimately what this points to is this dissolving of I and mine, which is a real compelling quality of waking up. I hope this was helpful for you. It's a true pleasure and joy to share these practices and technologies. And I wish you well, and I look forward to more down the road.